When I was a child, running in the night, I was afraid of what might be. Hiding in the dark and hiding on the streets for and of what was following me.
Barry Hyde is a singer and songwriter from the northeast of England, most prominently known for his role as the lead singer and guitarist for the band the Futureheads. Barry has gone on to write a variety of albums with the Futureheads, as well as touring around the world extensively with the band. Today he joins us to talk about his album Malody, which he recorded in 2016 and is written about his battles with mental health. Big thanks to Barry for joining us today for this conversation, and we hope you enjoy.
Okay, hi Barry, thank you for joining us. So the first question I have for you today is just, could you give us a brief overview of who you are and a bit about your background and sort of who you are today?
Okay, hi Scott, how are you doing?
Thank you, I'm all right.
My name is Barry Hyde. I am a professional musician. I am also a business operator. I run a music venue and restaurant, which I took on in order to realize my main business focal point, which was to set up a partner college with the University of Sunderland. So I'm running a company called The Peacock, which is an Edwardian public house. Mainly my wife, Cindy, runs that. And then I also have a business called Northern Academy of Music Education, which I'm running with a gentleman called Dan Donnelly. I'm the lead singer in a band called the Futureheads, a band that formed in the year 2000. We've released 6 albums, and I've also released in that time a solo album called Malody, which I think we're going to talk about today. And also I'm about to finish a second solo album that'll come out next year. I live in Sunderland, which is in the northeast of England, a place that is very dear to me, and I'm one of the people who really champions the activities in Sunderland and have done for many years. I've been involved in the music industry for a long time now. I guess about 20 years. I became a professional musician when I was in my early 20s, and I was lucky to have done about 2,000 professional gigs, played all over the world, toured America 15 times, went to far off places like, played in Russia, Mexico, Thailand, toured around Australia, every country in Europe. And that was what I did in my younger years. I was a full-time professional musician, and now very much kind of home bird. I've got 3 children. And yeah, I'm kind of enjoying concentrating on teaching people about music and the music industry, and also, kind of the fun of running a music venue and being a landlord.
Yeah, amazing, man. Yeah, I mean, I'm a huge fan of the band, and a huge fan of your work, so it's a privilege to speak to you. So yeah, you said there we're going to focus on Malody, which is the solo album you released, and it's great to hear that you've got another one on the way, by the way. Yeah, well, just focusing on Malody, I guess. So you released it. I mean, it's very different to. Well, for me, it felt very different to everything you'd ever released before. So what inspired you to write Malody, essentially, then?
Well, again, I didn't write it. I didn't write it as a, it naturally evolved out of curiosity and eventually, kind of increasing passion for the piano, and also my kind of love of music theory.
Right. Okay.
So I was kind of interested in the tonalities of the ancient Greek modal system.
Right.
You know, I kind of started writing this motif using the Lydian mode,
Right.
which you could also call the natural major sharp 4 mode. And I started to explore or remember from when I was at college this idea of modulation and extended chords and using motif and dynamic changes. So I kind of put together wrote this like these 5 different pieces of music, and then used motif and tempo change to build them into one piece of music. And that's what I call well, it's called the Malody suite.
Yeah.
And whilst I was creating these pieces of music, I was having some very severe personal mental health problems. And in a sense, sorry, this is my kitten.
Oh yes.
Yeah, we've just got two kittens. They're siblings, Bonnie and Clyde.
Bonnie and Clyde, amazing.
Yeah. Where are you going, Clyde? And Clyde's quite flighty.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
Anyway, so I started to have, shall we call it, wellness problems, and this went on for years, and I didn't really seek any help. I was just kind of trying to deal with it, and it culminated to what would be called a mental health crisis.
Right.
Which is the equivalent, I suppose, with physical health of when you break a leg.
Yeah.
So you no longer can you function in the way that you would normally. But it's not your body, it's your mind.
Yeah.
And this is a real problem.
Yeah.
Because we can't put a bandage on the mind. It's tied in with obviously psychological habits, rumination, extreme mental health states like depression, which can become extremely dangerous, and then also what's called mania, which is when someone is kind of becomes a danger to themselves or others because of, you might say, too much energy, rather than the opposite of which would be depression, where you have no energy at all.
Yeah.
So I was kind of, it felt like at the mercy of some kind of mental health crisis, and I ended up having to go into hospital.
Right.
Because it became so bad. I needed primary care.
Yeah.
And I had to essentially be removed from the outside world for a while, because I was not very well at all.
Yeah.
And leading up to that point, I'd been writing all of this music. So even though I wasn't terribly functional, like I couldn't really go out. I had so much anxiety, and even things like I wasn't even just going to have a shower was almost beyond my ability at that point. It seems so strange to say that now.
Yeah.
But it became chronic, the mental health problems.
Yeah.
So when I started to recover, you might say, and by the way, that I'm still in that process now, and it was 10 years ago.
Yeah.
It's been a very gradual process. Some years later, I decided to kind of chronicle my recovery and also experience of having mental health crisis and putting it into an album.
Yeah.
So I came up with this idea of the word Malody, which is obviously a combination between malady with 2 A's and melody.
Yeah.
I'm trying to use the music to express illness.
Yeah.
You know, and then I had this little motif which kind of is I've used a motif is used more in classical music, and it's like a rhythm, a repeated rhythm and melody that you can modulate into different keys, and you can slow it down, speed it up. You could make it, if it's major, you can make it minor. But I'm trying to, you use it in a kind of I don't know, shall we say, slightly more sophisticated way than writing a pop song.
Yeah.
I pieced together these 5 songs and put them in a specific order to try and replicate the extremes of emotion that occur when you have something close to what's known as bipolar disorder.
Yeah.
Which used to be called manic depression.
Yeah.
And I think perhaps in terms of language, that might be more pertinent.
Yeah.
This bipolar disorder isn't very descriptive. Bipolar, well, what does that mean? When I think of bipolar, I think of the Earth. Because the Earth is bipolar, and it's like, hold on a minute. It's almost like, hold on, what does that mean? But manic depression is like someone has a problem with mania, which is when they're certain dangerous behaviors, what's known as magical thinking, or a common behavior of someone who has mania is that they spend all their money. Right?
Yeah.
So they've got their savings, and then they just decide to buy, I don't know, 10 MacBook Pros.
Yeah.
I need these computers, you know, and then it's like they end up in financial trouble, or they might not be sleeping very much.
Yeah.
And not looking after themselves. And I've tried there's a couple of pieces of music that are very rapid and very dynamic, and that for me was me trying to do a representation of what it feels like when you're when your behavior's out of control in that way. And then some more kind of subdued, melancholic, somber pieces, and weaving them together in a very and putting them together like very bluntly, so one just goes straight into the other to try and show what it's like to be having that type of illness.
And how did you try and get that message across? Obviously, you were saying there you use like different tempos, different keys, modulations, transitions, and everything between pieces, musically, like from an instrumental standpoint. But like lyrically, how did you piece the whole thing together as well? Because obviously some of the lyrics are quite, some of the lyrics are quite hard hitting as well, and very personal. So, like we've got probably some people watching now who are not very musical at all, let's say, but very creative in terms of like from a writing perspective. So how how did you like develop the lyrics, and how did you sort of get that message across that you wanted to the audience?
For me, writing music and writing lyrics, I don't know if it is separate parts of the brain, but for me, I tend to write a lot of music first, and then the writing lyrics. Obviously, melodies become kind of syllabic templates, and therefore rhythm. The rhythm of a melody has to fit with the syllables of the words. So I've never just sat and written out poetry and wrote music to it. I always try and get the melodic ideas there first, and then it always starts with some kind of like there needs to be like a word. And I'm not really I don't really think of myself as a lyricist, because I don't know, I'm kind of, I love writing lyrics, but I tend to do it very quickly. And
Right.
to some degree, the kind of criteria is to write some lyrics that I'm not entirely, like, completely embarrassed by. You know, I have to want them to come out of my mouth.
Yeah.
And sometimes I enjoy playing around with the kind of the sound of words and whatnot, especially in the Futureheads. But I find I have to, like, really, my advice to, you know, for writing lyrics is you have to jump into it and allow patience to be there. So, you know, once I started to get in the flow of writing lyrics, it's actually my favorite part of being a songwriter, but it's very rare.
Right. Interesting.
So with regards to Malody, you know, obviously I'm using some kind of metaphor. Well, actually, you know, the way that it actually started to evolve is I wanted to make it into a musical.
Okay.
So
I can see that, yeah.
in this musical, Malody was a person,
Okay.
a girl,
Right.
and you know, I wanted to make a vampire musical, Scott.
Right. I wasn't expecting that.
Yeah, well, this is it. I'm when I was kind of a bit unwell, and I had some basic ideas using some of these songs. I called a meeting with the band,
Okay.
and I said, you know, for our fifth album, I want to do a vampire musical.
Right.
And they were like, no way. And I think we almost split up, to be honest.
Yeah.
And they were like, that's a ridiculous idea. And in the end, we ended up doing an a cappella album instead. But I was just kind of like, I didn't want to just go and make another Futureheads album, you know, like quote unquote Futureheads album with spiky guitars and 4-part harmonies. I wanted it to be slightly different. But anyway, they rejected my idea to make a musical about vampires, even though it was obviously going to be massive and probably would be on Broadway by now.
Yeah.
But yeah, so back to the lyrics on Malody.
Yeah.
It was a very personal experience writing those lyrics. I do seem to remember writing quite late at night, alone. I mean, songwriters are quite lonesome, I find, you know, especially when you kind of, the way I like to think of lyrics, I'm happy to be patient to get them right. But once you start to get that flow with what you're expressing with lyrics, it's very exciting. You know? And also the process of singing is very therapeutic. So I've got this song called Theme, which is kind of a searching song, and I'm using metaphor really, and I'm kind of talking about really myself, you know, the experience of depression when you look in the mirror and you don't recognize the person, you know. And I did feel like I was essentially a ghost or something like that when I was ill. I felt like I had no power, and that all of my energy had been depleted, and that effectively my life and my opportunities were over. And it wasn't true. But when someone becomes chronically mentally ill, that is how it feels. So even though it's not true, it is real. And one thing that we lose the ability is the ability to generate hopefulness. As soon as you can't generate any hopefulness, you become hopeless.
Yeah.
And hopelessness is the root of all depression and misery. And, you know, this idea that I was searching for the return of me, the energetic person, the creative person, the outgoing entrepreneurial kind of front man, you know, this kind of you know, the guy that everyone loves. It just vanished, you know, and I was trying to search for this person to bring them back. There's a line about, you know, searching through the oceans, you know, into the depths, with the sharks and conger eels, you know, like these kind of scary monsters. You know, I felt like very much I was living in some kind of tortured and hellish, emotionally painful world. And then there's another track called Monster Again, which is like my experience of mania, when you're so full of yourself that you're unbearable and you're almost monstrously confident.
Yeah.
And you're like, you're taking everyone's energy by how big your personality is, you know. And then there's a lot of confusion, and then there's the come down after, which is awful. There's all this kind of embarrassment and guilt and, you know, regrets. You know, you're kind of being tossed from pillar to post with bipolar disorder. So in short, you know, for me, writing lyrics is very much, you've got a blank page. You know, I never have a real kind of idea about what I'm going to write. But it is the kind of most alchemical part of it, because you are kind of literally creating out of thin air. And it's important to be authentic.
Yeah.
You know, that authenticity might be, I don't know. I once wrote a song in the Futureheads about, we got burgled, right? While we're all in bed, and they stole a remote control for a DVD player, but they didn't steal the DVD player.
Right.
So I wrote a song imagining if these criminals could actually use that remote control to pause us. So it's like, you know, somebody stole our remote control and they could turn us off, you know, whenever they want. So it's like, you know, for me, that's kind of whimsical, but it's also authentic.
Yeah.
You know, because based on something that really happened. What really matters is how lyric and melody and rhythm combine. That's what really matters, you know, and that's a lot of fun to play with, you know, in terms of placement of melody and where you're stressing your, if you're using rhymes, where you're stressing them. You know, you can really kind of experiment with how things flow.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. Brilliant. It's so interesting. So interesting how you were saying there about you really very much like write the instrumentation, everything first, and then you go right in at the end with lyrics. I feel I work in a very similar way. I've always throughout my whole life struggled with lyrics. And I don't know what it is, but then, like you say, suddenly there'll be a melody or there'll be a rhythm that comes through, and then instantly you can just latch onto that and you can start developing, like you say, syllabic, melismatic, you know, melodies and lyrics around that. And I think that's really great.
It's fun. I think I really do think of music as like a game, really, or like a puzzle.
Yeah.
You know, and you know, I've been lucky to release a lot of music now. I guess, I mean, we did kind of split up for several years, mainly down to my own mental health problems. Really, you know, we took a break of about 4 or 5 years. But you know, these days it's all about just sparking off some kind of what I feel like is a new idea, and to some degree, you know, every time I write a song, for a split second, I think it's going to become the biggest song in the world. Like, you know, I have to slightly allow myself to fantasize about that, purely because it's a nice feeling, and you think, well, you know, I've got this solo album coming out, and I'm probably just going to release it myself. Who knows? Maybe get a record label to do it, but you know, it's going to be a small scale release. But I do have to, deep inside, imagine that, you know, some of the music's going to end up in a Quentin Tarantino film.
You never know. You never know. So just to take you back to Malody again, you were saying, interesting how you were saying Malody was meant to be a girl, and I'm gonna, if I can, if you don't mind me using some of the kind of like, as we're talking, some of the the footage from the video for the Malody Chronicle. Obviously, that's all sort of set out at sea. And you were saying that, you know, sea creatures and things like the sharks and everything else, like sort of these scary monsters. What was the sort of inspiration behind this, the accompanying music video? Because it is again a pretty dark, you know, hard hitting sort of video.
Well, I reached out to see if I could find an animator to do an animation to go with this 10-minute suite of songs. And I think she was only 16, called Lily Cruiser.
Oh wow.
And she, you know, I commissioned her to do an animation. And you know, it was kind of very much like, I gave her some guidance as to some of the things that might happen in it, you know. Essentially this searching love story, but in reality, you know, it's the boy and the girl, or maybe it's just my two sides or something like that. But there's like, you know, literal interpretation of the lyrics, and then there's, you know, shipwreck and, you know, danger, and then eventually they kind of go off into the sunset together. And that's the last piece in Malody is like it's like the healing track. It's like, you know, the storm is over, and that was kind of me essentially reminding myself that I was better, you know. And I based actually on the first prelude in C by Johann Sebastian Bach.
Oh, okay.
Which was the first piece of music I ever learned how to play when I was about 8-year-old. And it's a really well-known piece of classical music, and I stole it.
yeah. Recontextualized. I think is okay.
You're allowed to do it, you know. It happens now and then in pop music. I know Barry Manilow did it on a song that was eventually covered by Take That.
Right.
Baby, I want you back now, da 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 da. That's actually that's a Chopin piece, one of his slow studies, and you know you take the harmonic work and kind of put a new rhythm underneath it. It's quite a nice arrangement technique. I've done it again actually on my new album with the a track based on the cello suite in G by Bach. Because I think Johann Sebastian Bach is like the most incredible songwriter, composer. You know, his contribution it eclipses everyone's as far as I'm concerned. You know, you can take like 6 bars of any of his music. You can study that for the rest of your life. You know. And he was doing it, you know, at such a pace that it's almost superhuman. You know.
And such a great recycler of music. Like we're studying Bach at the school at the minute, and you know, we talk about, oh, you hear this theme here, and then we'll listen to another Bach piece, and we're saying, how can you hear that? It's pitched up a fifth, or it's basically the same thing but backwards. And that he needed to write that much music in his lifetime because it was his life, it was his job, you know. And if he didn't do it, it was out of work. So, it's just such a way of writing music.
It is, and it's kind of he was really pushing the boundaries of what music was, and apparently he was an incredible improviser, you know.
Right.
He was like renowned. I mean, imagine watching Bach do an organ improvisation. Some people witnessed that back then. It must have absolutely blown their minds, you know. His voicings, you know, what a composer or a songwriter really can be boiled down to is obviously ultimately their choice of notes and how they arrange the notes, because we've got a template of tonality for most tonal music, and it's based around triads really, and the 12-note scale, and but the way that Bach, there's certain rules from what I've studied about, certain rules of tonality and using what's called intervals, and extended chords, and the cycle of fourths and fifths, like his trademarks. I use them all the time because they really work, and they've stood the test of time. And I think the difference between a composer and a songwriter is that a composer is really using music as poetry, and the songwriter is using music as a cushion for their poetry.
Yeah.
When you're talking about Stravinsky, he's using tonality, he's using light and darkness in the same way that a painter, a great master, would use paint to express the sunrise. He's like, I want to make tension now, so he's going to use cluster chords that make you want to throw up. It's like there's some rock musicians do that as well. Like think about like some of the noise rockers, Glenn Black, or Sonic Youth, who are basically using tonality to create disturbance. Using an array of guitar pedals or whatever, but going beyond, here's some nice lyrics. It's like, let's actually create atmosphere. Music, for me, that you don't really need training to do that. It's more just that's pure artistry. So I'm always trying to encourage my students to just increase their ability to express. Music theory can be a daunting barrier to expression, but if utilized correctly, we can actually start to really contribute to the story of expression in music.
What a great quote. Love that. Love that. So I guess just to kind of round it off then, we've covered a lot of the sort of questions we sort of had prepared for you. What message did you want your listeners, readers, to get from Malody?
Well, I suppose, I mean, I performed the Malody Suite recently at a gig in Sunderland, because I did a solo gig for this new album that I kind of launched then, and I started with the Malody Suite, so me at the piano, and I always feel like I need to explain what it is before I play it.
Right.
And that really helps. So I don't know, in and of itself, I think when people listen to Malody, it will have an emotional effect on them. But of course, if they know the context of what it means, then it's going to have a deeper effect.
Yeah.
Right?
Have you found like it's really had an impact on, people who have maybe gone through what you've gone through, or being maybe affected by sort of mental health problems? Has anyone ever reached out to you and said, oh, this really resonated with me, or anything like that, either the lyrics or the music or both?
Yeah, it has happened, definitely. But that's what I was going for.
Right.
And also, to some degree, it was almost like me drawing a line on that era of my life and documenting it. So a kind of like catharsis, but to say like, okay, I've done this album. I'm moving on now.
Yeah.
Not in a kind of prima donna-ish way. More like, okay, like I understand this now, and here's my proof to myself that I've done the work to actually be able to move forward in life. And even though life is, I think life's supposed to be hard, Scott.
Yeah. It's definitely, I think
it's, if you ever feel like life's being hard on you, well, it's easier to think of it, well, it's supposed to be hard, but we have to take that as an opportunity to become stronger people.
Yeah.
And every time life throws a challenge, if you grapple it and boss it, then guess what? You move on to the next challenge, which is harder. And
Yeah, yeah.
it keeps on coming. And that, I think that's why we're here, you know, to grow as people, to become better people. And if we're going to do something like music and concentrate on art, then we really have to do our best to improve our ability to express, to increase our skills, to affect more and more people, you know.
Yeah.
And you know, what my advice to young musicians is, like, if you can sit in a room with a guitar and just look at it, then you'll never be a musician. You know, when I was learning, if I was in the house, I was playing the guitar.
Yeah.
You know, I read that Jimi Hendrix used to sleep with his guitar. So guess what I started doing? He used to go to the toilet with his guitar.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah.
like, if you're not obsessed with music, then you're never going to get it.
Yeah, yeah.
Never going to get it. You might become proficient, but in terms of that real special connection to music, where you do gain the skills, so where you can actually start to express your emotions through it.
Yeah.
That's real music, and that's what it's all about for me, you know.
Yeah. Brilliant. I mean, closing question. We've got a few minutes left. Might overrun slightly, but yeah. So what are we obviously know your current plans and what you're doing. Has, thinking back to when you were first starting out as a musician and where you are now, how has your opinion of music and art and, you know, everything that goes on in your world creative, has it changed? Like, has your perception changed? Like, obviously now you were once, I guess, the mentee, now you're the mentor. Has that had an influence on you? Has everything you've been through with your, you know, battles with mental health and things like that, has that had an influence on you? You know, are you able to kind of sum up where you are now and what your maybe future aspirations are as a musician?
Well, that's a big one. I mean, because I'm working with you know, 18 to 20 odd year old young musicians, I'm kind of having a lot of nostalgia and realizations about what it's like to be a young adult, you know. And when you're that age, life is very vivid, you know. The energy is very new and raw, and new experiences are hitting you left, right, and center, and you're kind of at the mercy of that newness. And I think often when an artist becomes at that age, when they start to create, their music is very powerful and energetic, essentially. You know, when I think back to me, when I was like started to write songs about the age of 19, all I wanted to do was to create a band that was faster, tighter, more interesting than any other band in Sunderland.
Yeah.
There was a competitive element, not without it being like nasty, but it was just a case of, you know, we felt like we were doing something good, but we didn't have any music industry aspirations. It was very pure, you know. And that energy became our first album, and that album, you know, had enough success to open the world, you know. So when I think back to that young version of me sitting in my bedroom on the bottom bunk with an acoustic guitar, writing songs like First Day, Man Ray, Decent Days and Nights, you know, I had no idea that would eventually end up with me flying to New York to play on the Conan O'Brien show, you know. And then, of course, that kind of excitement and all of that honesty started to be slightly dampened by the experience of the music industry, which is a kind of hostile competitive environment, which forces us to start actually develop a different relationship with our creativity. Because when you're trying to make a living from your creativity, something happens. it's called pressure.
Yeah.
You know, so suddenly, you know, my ability to create was kind of in the context of, is this song going to be a hit? I never had that with any of
Yeah,
it.
right.
You know, so now, to, you know, to kind of answer your question, the difference is, you know, I'm always seeking to go back to that initial innocence of music. You know, I'm 42-year-old now. I've written hundreds of songs. I've been very lucky to experience what I've experienced with success, but I'm always searching for that authentic excitement and naturalness with music. And I can't forget everything I know. So
Yeah.
for me, it's like the excitement of recording, the excitement of engineering and producing, the excitement of setting a drum kit on a stairwell and placing mics everywhere. That excites me. Come here, son. Say hello.
Hello. Oh, it's Batman.
This boy's meant to be off sick, but he's jumping around the house.
Class. Is he a Batman fan?
Oh, he loves all the superheroes, Scott. Who's your favourite? Solly? Who's your favourite? He likes Batman at the minute.
I'm a fan myself.
I'll put it on for a sec, son. I'll put it on in a sec.
Yeah. Amazing. Anyway, I mean, like I think that's great. Thank you so much.
No bother, mate. Thanks for having me.